Before we get started today, since we're going to end up doing communion kind of at the end, I want to just briefly pass along a word of thanks to you as a church. Chatted with Matt and Callie yesterday evening through text, and they wanted to thank you guys so much for your prayers and your love and the meals, and that you guys they really thank you for the support they've had this week. So I wanted to pass those words along before I got started today. Today it is a little bit different. I've always told you guys as a pastor I don't believe in being phony with you guys and tell you that it's been an easy week or that I'm where I need to be. It's been hard. It's been a hard week for us as a church and for me as a pastor. And I've done a lot of different things this week, having to do a lot of different things outside of the church. And so today's sermon is a little, I don't know if you call it rough around the edges. Okay, it's a little rough around the edges, let's put it that way. I went back to the liturgy this week after doing a wedding on Saturday and a baccalaureate on Sunday and a funeral on Wednesday. I just kind of got to the place where I couldn't, I was trying to come up with different ideas and things like that, and so I just kind of returned to the liturgy. It's always good sometimes just to return back to that regularly scheduled reading that's there for you. And I went to the gospel reading, and I realized it was one that I preached about like 3 weeks ago. So I was like, well, I can't preach that one. And then the other one was the reading from what we call the letters, and they usually encompass Paul. This one happens to encompass 1 John. And I thought it was a real fitting kind of reading today. And so I'm going to do a little bit different. I don't have any real good, clever introduction. I'm going to start with the scripture, and we're just going to kind of talk about it. For those of you that join us on Wednesday nights, it'll be kind of like an extended version of a Marcus talk on Wednesday nights, because I know I try to engage most of you, but sometimes I get going, and I have to look at my audience to say, okay, Marcus, be quiet. Well, since it's a sermon, I just get to kind of riff on this, and y'all are going to sit here and listen. But it's one that I was kind of working through the process of it, and it really did speak to me this week. So we're in 1 John chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone who loves the Father loves his child as well. This is how we know that we love the children of God, by loving God and carrying out his commands. In fact, this is love for God, to keep his commands. And his commands are not burdensome, for everyone born of God overcomes the world. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. Who is it that has overcome the world? Only the one who believes that Jesus is the Son of God. If you're doing this faith journey thing right, you will discover that as you go along, you become a lot more self-reflective about who you are and how you interact with the people around you and even God himself. And I think that following God should always make us take a real hard look at what we believe and how we act. And the hard thing is that it's never a process that's really ever finished in our lives. And I think this is the hardest part whenever I'm explaining to people about what it means to be a Christian and follow Jesus. That's the hardest part to explain, that it's never really something that you arrive at in this world. It's always something that you're doing. You're always trying to figure out what it means to live a life of love. And if we're honest with ourselves in any of our relationships that we have around us, whether we're married or not married or even with our children, relationships are always dynamic. And if you're not always thinking about how you are, and you don't have to do it consciously, but if you're not always kind of in the process of figuring out what it means to have a relationship with somebody else, then those relationships will suffer. They always do. And so John, in this little reading here, this letter of 1 John, he's making the connection between what it means to have this belief in Jesus and what it means for the person that you are becoming. If you say you believe in Jesus, and that's one of the things that throughout the years in this church that I tell people I'm obsessed with. I'm not as interested in you telling me what you believe about Jesus as in the person that when you say you believe in Jesus, the person you're becoming because of that belief. I mean, we can say we believe all kinds of things, But if there's no evidence in our life, then then rightly so, we should be questioned about those beliefs. So one of the things and the ways that Jesus described entering the kingdom of heaven was the concept of being born again. Now, he has this dialogue, I think it's in the Gospel of John, actually, maybe in Matthew. And he has this dialogue with a guy who's named Nicodemus. And Nicodemus was a very literal sort of fellow. When Jesus would use this kind of metaphorical statement that in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, that you must be born again, Nicodemus conjured up all kinds of images and essentially said, Jesus, that's impossible. You can't go back and come back out again. That's not how it works. So Jesus, Jesus kind of does, shaking his head at Nicodemus, and he begins to kind of describe the process. But, and I've told this before, Jesus, it's hard sometimes to follow Jesus when he begins to use these metaphors. And he talks about a real birth versus spiritual birth, and it's still quite confusing. So here, in this little letter, John is bringing clarity to the process. He says it in quite simple terms, that if you believe in Jesus, then you're in God. And because we are in God, we love God and carry out his commands. Now, those words bother me. Commands, obedience. I make it no secret that I have always had trouble with authority. I don't know where this came from. My parents were good people, taught me to respect things. But I will say that at one point, I think, my dad was kind of a hippie, kind of always questioned the man. So that kind of came into play. But I kind of fell into it naturally. I've always had trouble with people in authority telling me what to do and how to believe. Now, to be fair, I wasn't one of those very rebellious teenagers. I make no secret, I was a nerdy band geek. That's just who I was. And I really loved church. My biggest rebellion away from church was the 6 weeks when I was a freshman in college. And then I didn't go to church for 6 weeks, and I felt terrible, and then I came back to church. So when I say that I've always had trouble with authority, it's always whenever I would have deep questions about the nature of the reality around us and how relationships work. And I would ask these questions to spiritual leaders in authority, and I would always, I would ask, why does it have to be this way? To be fair, when I first started, it was never belligerent. It was always because the way it was explained to me didn't make sense. And so I would think a little bit deeper about this, and I would go, well, that doesn't make sense. Why is it this way? And the answer, well, just because that's the way it is, never satisfied me. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And what it told me was those jokers didn't know either, and they just wanted to shut down the questioning process. And so they would just essentially say, well, just listen and obey and do what we say. Well, that doesn't work with me. And so when I hear that word obedience, I have this knee-jerk reaction. Obey my commands. Psh, yeah, right. Why should I? What's the reasoning behind this? And I always hated to do anything just because. And my mom would tell you, she used the phrase often when I was a teenager, that I could argue with a fence post and win. Because that's just my personality. I would. Or I would, use all my breath trying to argue with a fence post. So John, though, as he's tying this love of God with obedience. And like I said, my knee-jerk reaction is, no, I don't want to do that. Because no one ever, when people explain things to me about doing things, it doesn't make any sense. And it's just, like I said, it's just this knee-jerk reaction. I hate being told what to do. But once I kind of get past that kind of knee-jerk response about being bossed around, and having to demonstrate my affection through obedience, I have to stop and ask the question, so what are these commands then that Jesus gives us? John, he's not specific here. He just says, obey God's commands. So I begin to think of the commands. Now, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, there's like 600 some odd laws, and they're all kind of weird. Some of them are weird and funky, and we don't really know what they mean. But Jesus comes along, and Jesus, he does a really great job. He takes all of that Leviticus and Deuteronomy that nobody likes to read. He says, look, there's just two commands. I can memorize 2 commands. I can memorize 2. They are to love and to love. Love your God, love your neighbor. That's it. 2 commands. You show your love for God by loving your neighbor. And by loving your neighbor, you show your love for God. It's this lovely little circular thing that John is developing here. That if you love God, you're going to love your neighbor. And if you show love to your neighbor, then you're demonstrating your love for God. That's what God's ordering us to do. He's not ordering us to do anything else. He's ordering us to love. And of course, we know how Jesus defines neighbor. Because, I'm one of those people that I'm always looking for the loophole. I want to know exactly who it is, how far this love has to go, and can I please get out of loving some people? Let's just be honest. Because I love what John says here. He's saying is you're carrying out the commands of God. You're going to love God. You're going to love your neighbor. And then he puts this lovely little phrase in there. And his commands are not burdensome. Now, I don't know John, but if he was standing here in front of me, I would go, really, John? Really? Loving other people is not burdensome. Do you know what you're asking? Do you want to know the kinds of people I interact with on a daily basis? Loving some people feels quite burdensome. It does. Can't I just love some people and then just give the church more money to make up for the rest? Because I'm totally willing to do that. I'm willing to tithe against the people that I can not like. But we're not given that command. We're not given that way out. We're not given the option here. And so what I had to do is I had to look at this word burdensome, because it is hard to love other people. You can say amen to that if you want to. It's fine. Okay. I know you're introverts, but I thought somebody would give a shout out to that one. But burdensome doesn't mean that it's not hard to do. That's not what burdensome means. It means that through doing them, and they can be hard work, we are changed. I look at it a lot like exercise. Because as a man who's crossed into his late 30s, in the last 4 or 5 years we've been really good about doing exercise. I hate it. I still don't like it. I think we're like in year 4, and we're not like just killing it, as you can tell. I'm no Arnold Schwarzenegger up here. But I realized, as I aged, that in order to maintain a certain level of health, I'm going to have to do it. And, we do different cardio and strength. It's like 30 minutes a day. And every day, I dread it. Every day after school, I try to find out a way to get out of it. I don't want to do it. I'm like, and I love the list of excuses. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm tired. It's usually how it goes. Tired a lot. But I do it, even though it's hard work. And through doing it, my health is transformed. But I can look back when we started this whole process 5 years ago through exercise, and I had to, most days, there were days by the time I got to Sunday, I had to have a nap. I don't have to have a nap anymore because my basal metabolism and all that's gotten a little better. It's still not easy. It's not an easy thing to do, but I do it. But it's not burdensome. And I think that that's kind of what John is saying here. He's saying loving our neighbor is hard work. He's not denying that it can be hard work. But through the actual physical demonstration of that love in the world through our actions, that's the only way to overcome our own baggage. We overcome our own stuff by following in the Jesus way of love, not by forcing it, not by making some sort of New Year's resolution, not through force of will or anything like that. We can't fix what's wrong with us. The way to God is embracing the forgiven life itself, seeing our own brokenness, recognizing that everyone around us has this same brokenness in them, and that we are all connected to each other through this humanity. This brokenness that each of us carry can only be overcome through forgiveness, through faith, through the belief in Jesus as the Son of God. And if we believe that, then we love the Father. And if we love the Father, then we carry out His commands. And His commands are simply, love your God and love your neighbor. This is how we win. John poses the question at the end of this reading, who is it that has overcome the world? How do you overcome all of these things in our own life that drag us down? It's not through a force of will. It's not through self-help, but by faith. I think the church today would do well to remember that. Our faith is not placed in a triumphant, conquering king who is coming down to be the almighty smiter, but in a poor, humble Son of God who gave up everything to come down here and show us a better way to live, who suffered and died because we didn't want to give up our petty own kingdoms. But he said, even if you can't give up your things, I'm going to die for you anyway. I'm going to give myself for you. A man who said, this is my body broken for you. To the one who is suffering from loss, this is Christ's body broken for you. To the doubter, this is Christ's body broken for you. To the addict, this is Christ's body broken for you. To the one who loves Jesus and hates the church, this is Christ's body broken for you. To the one who works so hard to hide their brokenness, this is Christ's body broken for you. To the one who is moved every single time you come to the table, this is Christ's body broken for you. To the one who comes to church just to make somebody else happy, this is Christ's body broken for you. To the one who has come to the table many times, this is Christ's body broken for you. To the one who comes for the first time, this is Christ's body broken for you. To the faithful member, this is Christ's body broken for you. For the wandering stranger, this is Christ's body broken for you. For this is Christ's table, not mine. It is he who bids you come and meet him here. All who come in humbleness and with an open heart are welcome here to fellowship with us. If you would all please stand, we'll open the table.